Good evening and thanks for joining us on our special coverage of the appointment of Shaktikanta Das as the 25th Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. He did take charge as the Governor earlier today and is expected to address the media in a few moments from now. So Shaktikanta Das has taken over as the head of the central bank after the sudden exit of Urjit Patel amidst an ongoing tussle between the centre and the Reserve Bank of India. I can tell you, while the communication between the central government as well as the Reserve Bank of India will be bridged now with the arrival of Mr. Shaktikanta Das on Mint Street, regulatory coordination certainly has started on a strong wicket on his first day in office. There was a SEBI press conference that was clashing with the Reserve Bank's press conference. The SEBI press conference has now been moved to 5:30 to ensure that all eyes are on the RBI Governor's first press conference, which is expected to start in just a few moments from now. So the regulators coordinating and SEBI moving its press conference to 5:30. Ritu Singh is at the RBI headquarters in Mumbai. Ritu, first day for the RBI Governor and unlike Urjit Patel, who didn't really like addressing the press very much, Mr. Das has actually been quite accessible to the press here in Delhi in his earlier avatar in the Finance Ministry, and today kick-starting his stint at the Reserve Bank with a press conference. Tell us about the challenges that he faces as he takes over.
Shaktikanta Das has taken charge as the 25th Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. He is a veteran of the Finance Ministry. He has held positions of the Revenue Secretary and the Economic Affairs Secretary in the past, but most recently he was a member of the 15th Finance Commission and India Sherpa to the G20. Now the new Governor takes charge at a critical time when tensions between the Reserve Bank of India and the central government have come to the fore. The December 14th RBI board meeting is something that is going to be very crucial for the new governor. Do remember the government has proposed various changes, especially with regards to the governance structure of the RBI, where they want the central board to have a more direct say into the functions of the RBI and the decisions that it makes. Also, the capital framework of the RBI is being studied. There is, clamour from the government to relax the prompt corrective action norms, to ease the Feb 12 circular. So all of these things, as well as the liquidity crisis in the NBFC sector, all of that will have to be taken care of by the new governor. So it is clear the challenges are many and he will have to hit the ground running.
All right, Ritu, thanks very much. We will, of course, go back to the RBI headquarters as soon as Mr. Das addresses the media. But let's bring in Anant Narayan. Anant, Dr. Patel wasn't a big fan of media press conferences and certainly not long media press conferences. In fact, the engagement with media after the bi-monthly policy was always a short affair. Here is the new governor who is going to kickstart his innings by addressing the media. What's your own sense on what we could expect from him, because he is acutely aware of the fact that he treads into troubled waters? What do you believe is his messaging is likely to be?
Well, absolutely, Shireen. Look, it's welcome to hear that there is a press conference with the governor of RBI actually addressing it. And I believe he's also active on Twitter. So here's to more communication, and which will be welcome all round. Look, I think what would be great is if he can assuage the concerns that this could be a convenient appointment by the government in order to paper over the differences which exist between them and the RBI and force RBI to come around to their way. The conditions under which he's been appointed are fairly unfortunate. We know that there were very, very contentious issues and substantial contentious issues between the RBI and the government. They were just listed out just now. What we don't want is foreign investors taking back the impression that this is a pliant governor who is going to acquiesce to whatever the government says, particularly in respect of critical issues such as dipping into the cookie jar of RBI's balance sheet in a difficult election year with a lot of fiscal challenges and with populism around the corner. If he can assuage those concerns and reiterate the fact that he's his own man and will take things the way RBI governors normally take it, that will be great. But frankly, seeing will be believing. I think today's press conference will be very welcome. It will be very comforting. But the market will continue to watch what the actual actions are between now and the board meeting and beyond.
Obviously, that the decision-making on part of the new governor is what the markets will watch out for. But let's go to Ashima Goel, member of the MPC. Ashima, thanks very much for joining us. As we pointed out, that there are several contentious issues that are likely to be taken up. We are given to understand that the 14 December board meeting, as of now, stands. Could there be a change in that decision? We are not aware of it just yet. But according to the Economic Affairs Secretary, Subhash Chandra Garg, the 14 December board meeting of the Reserve Bank of India still stands. What would your expectation be? The buzz is that, for instance, in the last board meeting, the assumption was that board governance-related issues would get top priority at the next board meeting. With the change that we've seen at the leadership, do you believe that that's unlikely to be a priority any longer?
Yes, I think that it was necessary for the board to talk to the top RBI management because they weren't talking to very many other people. But now you have a new governor who is known for dialogue, and that is what we expect from him, that he will talk to a large number of people, to the markets, to experts, since he doesn't have an economic background. But then he will be his own man, talk to the government, and make decisions that are in the best interest of the country, as well as satisfy the objectives of the Reserve Bank, which is financial stability. And so this is what we will look for. And I think that the board issues, the controversy will also resolve. The board is an advisory body. It cannot dictate policy. And I think it will go back to that.
Well, that was the suggestion, that that is what the government would have wanted to change, that the board would no longer merely be in its advisory capacity, that the board would in fact not direct but pretty emphatically tell the Reserve Bank what it would like done.
No, I think that this was just assumed because of a change in one board member, but I don't think that is a very drastic change in governance. RBI law rules also don't allow for the board to dictate issues, and since they are not monetary or financial experts, and there are also conflicts of interest involved. But I think it is important for the Reserve Bank, finally, as it's accountable to the people, that it listens to a broad variety of opinions and then teases through that and finds out what is in the best interest, what is driven by own interest, and what is in the general interest, and then takes a decision. So I think the board should be another sounding board.
So you do believe should be a sounding board, advisory in capacity, but you do believe that given the leadership change, we're unlikely to see this being a priority item if the 14 December board meeting does in fact go through. I'll come back to you, Ashima, in just a second, but let me go across to the former Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Virmani. He's also here with us. Mr. Virmani, thanks very much for joining us. One of the contentious issues that Mr. Shaktikanta Das in his new role will have to deal with is the demand for added liquidity, for more liquidity. Now, was very, very clear through what we heard from both the governor, as the former governor, as well as the deputy governor recently after the bi-monthly policy, saying that there is no issue as far as liquidity is concerned. They don't believe that to be the case. They said very categorically that the RBI is the lender of last resort, but we don't believe that it has come to that pass yet. What would your expectation be on this issue? Because North Bloc continues to maintain that liquidity is a key challenge.
So, if you recall, I think on December 4th, EGROW Foundation, we held a seminar in IIC where I think some of your people were present, and you took note of that also. And in that, we had concluded that there is still scope for expanding liquidity. So it's a professional issue. It is not a question of whether government says or doesn't say or RBI says. So if you believe that this is a real issue, then clearly the new governor will take will and should take a new look at it and consider the issue afresh from every perspective. As Ashima just said, clearly, ultimately the RBI has to decide and its governor has to decide. But there is absolutely no harm. In fact, traditionally, it has been a great benefit to governors to take the views of different people. I think I mentioned this earlier also. Often when issue is a difficult professional issue, it is good to get various committees, various aspects, various stakeholders' views on this. Now, how exactly this
Dr. Virmani,
we'll have to wait.
Apologies, I'm interrupting you because Mr. Das has arrived and he is going to be speaking. So that's the new RBI governor. We've spent a lot of time with him here in North Block in his various roles as Revenue Secretary, as the Economic Affairs Secretary. Of course, he oversaw the demonetization exercise, and he was, in a sense, the public face of that entire exercise. He was the one briefing the media practically every day during the course of demonetization, and now he gets ready to face the media in another challenging time, and that is as he mends relations between the government and the Reserve Bank.
Please, because I can't, I can't see. Okay, so good evening, dear friends. Thank you for coming over at a very short notice. Your colleagues and friends in Delhi are very upset with me. Of course, I can see some of them here, because yesterday they were all trying to reach me, and I was not able to speak to the media in Delhi yesterday. So I'm sure they would be very upset, but there will be other opportunities to speak to them. So I want to be very brief, and I'm not really planning to make any, major announcements or anything like that, because it needs time for me to settle down to study all the issues. I just want to mention a few points. First, you would be aware that I assumed charge today in the morning as the 25th governor, and I am grateful for all the good wishes which I have received from many of you who are present here. The RBI is a great institution. It has got a very long legacy, a very rich legacy, and I will do everything that is possible. I'll try and uphold the professionalism, the core values, the credibility and the autonomy of the Reserve Bank as an institution. I have interacted at various levels with the officials of the Reserve Bank of India over the last 10 years or more than 10 years. And the interaction has been not only at the senior levels, but also at the middle level and even down the line. And there were situations where I was leading delegations from Government of India, which included officers from Reserve Bank of India, and I always found that they possess inherent core competence and professionalism to deal with any technical issue, be it monetary aspects or be it other aspects of currency management or other aspects of work relating to the functioning of central bank. So I'm looking forward to work with the entire team of officers and staff of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, it's a great opportunity for any individual, and especially for me, to work in RBI and thereby to serve the country. That might sound a bit cliched, but it is indeed a great opportunity. And I will work as a team with other officials here in the best interest of the economy, and try and take measures in a timely manner on issues, on aspects which the economy requires or which are in the best interest of the Indian economy. Decision making in the modern times have become very complex. Today we are living in a very dynamic world. It's much more dynamic than what it was, say, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago is a long period in the past, but even 3 years or 5 years ago. Decision making in today's world has become far more complex. And consultation with stakeholders is very important. Consultation with all the stakeholders always adds value to our understanding of issues. It adds depth to our understanding of issues. So therefore, I propose to undertake consultations wherever necessary as per requirement in a need-based manner on various issues. To begin with, I have convened a meeting with the MD and CEOs of the MDs and the CEOs of the public sector banks tomorrow in the morning. And as you know, banking is an important segment of our economy, and it's currently facing several challenges which are of critical importance and they need to be dealt with. There have been, I'm not implying in any manner that nothing has been done. A lot has been done. A lot has been done both by the government and by the Reserve Bank of India. Several measures have been taken, but many more measures also perhaps need to be taken. So tomorrow morning, I propose to undertake a consultation with the MDs and CEOs of the public sector banks who are based in Mumbai. Then immediately after that, maybe after another few days, I'll hold a consultation with the chiefs of public sector banks which are located outside Mumbai, because you cannot expect people who are outside Mumbai to come at such a short notice. Then subsequently at some stage I will have an interaction with the private sector banks also to understand the issues relating to them. So on the whole, it's a banking sector which I would like to focus immediately, but this will be followed by other kind of stakeholder consultations as may be required. There are a number of issues ahead. We have, of course, as you know, after the amendment of the Reserve Bank of India Act, the inflation targeting continues to be very important. And it's very heartening to note that the inflation, broadly, it is as per the targets. And the inflation outlook also looks fairly benign at this stage, but we have to be very watchful of the developments. The issue of health of public sector banks, I have already mentioned, that's an important issue. The issue of liquidity also comes up in the media space and in the public space from time to time. There again, I think that will be an area where one has to interact with stakeholders and get an internal feedback and then take a view on these issues. The maintenance of the growth trajectory of the Indian economy is also important. And so there are several areas which a central bank has to be dealing with. And so we will focus on those areas. And all these issues have been under focus. Let me make it very clear. It's not as if these areas did not receive any attention. I want to be very clear that all these aspects have been receiving focus, but it's a continuing exercise on the part of the central bank. So therefore, we will continue to focus on these areas. And you may be aware that the central board meeting is scheduled to be held on the 14th of December. So we will hold the central board meeting as planned and go through the agenda and discuss the various issues that are listed. And I must also, before I conclude, like to make note of the stewardship provided by my predecessor, Dr. Urjit Patel, to the Reserve Bank of India in the last 2.5 years. And I would like to also convey my best wishes to Dr. Urjit Patel for all his future endeavors. So thank you. I'll stop here.
So, can you tell us something about...
So I'll just take very few questions because as I mentioned earlier...
So will the issue... one word on cabinet.
Just one minute. Just one moment. Just one. I'll start here and come back. Yes.
Sir, I would like to know that there is a view that the RBI management should be accountable to the RBI board, and many important decisions should be there in the board. The board should have many committees. This is the view from the government, which the RBI under the previous governor's regime resisted, protested. What is your view on the issue of governance for RBI, which is a very important issue that will be discussed on the board meeting on 14th?
No, I would not like to go into what were the issues or what are the issues between government, which is an important, which runs the country, and the Reserve Bank of India. But every institution, every institution has to have its professional integrity, maintain its professional autonomy. At the same time, every institution also must adhere to principles of accountability.
So, if I can please take a question, sir, you're coming in at a time. You're coming in at a time.
I'll just come. Yeah.
Sir, the Reserve Bank's capital has been a contentious issue. What are your views? Do you expect the committee to take a call before the fiscal year is out?
No, let the committee be constituted. I think as you are aware, the committee has to be constituted, and I think very shortly the committee will be constituted. And then the terms of reference of the committee will drop, so that will spell out how much time is required. So based on that, no, we'll have to consult whoever becomes the chairman of the committee. He has to be consulted before we fix a timeline.
So, but if I may ask a question, sir, you are coming to RBI as the 25th governor under unprecedented circumstances. If I may ask you a very frank and a candid and maybe a little blunt question, the relationship between the central government and the central bank has hit rock bottom. Will your priority be to first fix that relationship before some of the issues that you've listed out? The channels of communication seemingly are blocked.
No, I don't know about, what is blocked and whether the relationship is not, not good, or I won't like to go into that. But as I mentioned, that we have to have stakeholder consultation. We'll have to have consultation with everybody. Government is ultimately the government has government is not just a stakeholder, but I mean the government of the day runs the economy, runs the country, and manages major policy decisions. So that there has to be free, fair, objective, and very frank discussion with between the government and the Reserve Bank of India. And I would like to believe that all issues, howsoever contentious, can be resolved through discussions.
So you will be meeting Governor this side. Governor,
I'll come. I'll just come.
This side, please, Governor.
Sir, the February 12th circular, which was, of course, one big bone of contention. What is your view? You think there could be some kind of step back from?
No, views on individual issues I would not. Let me, I have to really, settle down, study the issues, and then take a view.
You're open to dialogue because there has been none from RBI and the government.
My personal views on these matters, on these things would not matter. What I have to really see and understand issues before I start commenting, because every observation made by the central bank has got, a lot of wide-ranging impact. So let me understand the issues. So I would not like to go in details. Yeah.
और आपकी जो शुरुआत हो रही है, आप सबसे पहले पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक से मीटिंग कर रहे हैं. काफी सारे पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक्स की ये शिकायत है कि वो लोन नहीं दे पा रहे हैं क्योंकि उनके ऊपर पीसीए के तहत प्रतिबंध है. क्या आप इसको रिव्यू करेंगे? इससे ग्रोथ को भी मदद मिलेगी? क्या आप इसके ऊपर ओपन हैं?
देखिए, पीसीए के साथ ही एक जनरल कंसल्टेशन है. मतलब कल के लिए कोई ऐसा फिक्स्ड एजेंडा नहीं रखा है. बैंकिंग जो सेक्टर है हमारे इकोनॉमी का एक बहुत बड़ा important wing of the economy. तो उनके साथ it's a general consultation to understand to sort of try and understand their understanding of not just the banking sector but also how the economy is functioning. It's a general interaction with the banks.
Sir, just to follow up, Governor, you'll be meeting with the heads of PSU banks tomorrow, as soon as tomorrow. Are you open to discussing, easing of capital requirements for these banks?
I will not reply to this question with reference to, I will not reply to your question specifically with reference to that, because the moment I say that, I am okay with this, then you will put a different headline. But please take it from me. Not, again, I am repeating, it's not with reference to your question. I am open to discussing all issues.
Governor, this is Subhashri from...
Governor, on the issue, you spoke about growth, on the issue of credit flow to the economy, both to the SME sector and the credit that was growing from NBFCs, which has been constrained. Do you think both of those are risks to growth, which the RBI under you would like to tackle?
I mean, these are all what you have mentioned are challenges, various challenges which the economy today faces, and all those challenges which come in the domain of the central bank naturally will receive the attention of the Reserve Bank of India.
Governor,
issue, sir.
Governor, inflation is expected to go below 3% later in the evening. What's your view on interest rates and inflation if inflation goes below 3%?
There is a monetary policy committee which has to decide. And inflation target, as I mentioned, let me make it very clear. Inflation targeting is a very important component of the RBI's functioning, and it's a function which the Monetary Policy Committee has to fulfill. I cannot jump the gun and make a statement at this point. Yeah.
So, Shri from Reuters, Governor, I wanted to understand what is your view about growth implications going ahead in terms of the growth momentum. Do you expect growth momentum to slow down going ahead? Is that a bigger focus for you now, given that inflation momentum is slowing down? Thank you.
No, I have mentioned that inflation targeting is an important function which the Reserve Bank of India Act, the government, the law, which has mandated. It's a mandatory requirement it's a mandatory part of the RBI's functioning, so that will remain very important. And issue of growth, I did mention, yes, I agree. And let us also keep in mind that this is a part of, if you read I'm not bringing anything which is extraneous to the RBI Act. If you see the preamble of the RBI Act, which talks about the Monetary Policy Committee, it also says that keeping in mind the requirements of growth. So I am not saying anything which is beyond the Reserve Bank of India Act.
But does that mean that you will promote, you will boost, help take growth measures, growth supportive measures?
No, what measures we will take?
I mean, are you in favor of promoting growth supportive measures?
What measures we will take, that you will know only when, some decision is taken.
I'm not asking for measures, sir.
So Bijoy from Cogensis here. So you're starting your tenure with the meeting with the PSU banks. Financial sector has been an issue. Financial services sector has been an issue. We have had ILNFS. You have entities that are governed by you, taking you to court. You have private sector banks that are now headless because the RBI has taken a tough stance on many of them. And you have 11 banks under PCA from the PSU banks. Is that going to be an area of focus, especially from the fact that you need to clarify on various financial sector regulations because of these kind of legal challenges that are being thrown at you now?
You see, life is never simple. And there are always multiple challenges. So we'll deal with them as we go by. We'll deal with all the issues that are, which, as I said, which come in the domain of the Reserve Bank of India. So,
Sir, India News से अभिषेक शर्मा. Sir, India News से अभिषेक शर्मा में. सर एक सवाल है, आम आदमी जिस तरह से आप नए गवर्नर आए हैं, आम आदमियों के लिए क्या खास होगा? क्योंकि सब लोग खास ये जानना चाहते हैं कि हमारे घर के रेट कब कम होंगे, यानी इंटरेस्ट रेट अब. क्या नए गवर्नर साहब लोगों के लिए नई सौगात लेकर आएंगे?
आपका सवाल का जवाब थोड़ी देर पहले मैंने दिया था. वो MPC है, मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी कमेटी. उसमें जो फैसला होगा आपको जब वो जो अगले मीटिंग जब भी ड्यू है आपको पता लग जाएगा. प्लीज.
Is the independence of the RBI intact?
I have mentioned right in the beginning that, I will sort of uphold the autonomy and the integrity and the, the credibility of the Reserve Bank of India as an institution. And I would believe that the autonomy and, independence of the RBI as an institution is very important and it will be intact.
Sir, now
why is he opening?
एक मिनट
सर मेरे को साधारण सा सवाल है कि आम आदमी हो या पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज में एक तरह की चर्चा हो रही है कि विश्वसनीयता आरबीआई की घट गई है और इस तरीके से आरबीआई का आपने पदभार ग्रहण किया है, तो इस इशू की तरह से एड्रेस करेंगे आम आदमी भी या पॉलिटिकल पार्टी?
नहीं, ऐसे कोई मतलब मैं उस जो एक पॉलिटिकल डिबेट है उसके तहत में उसके बारे में मैं कुछ नहीं कहना चाहता हूँ. वो जो पॉलिटिकल डिबेट है वो अलग जगह होता है. So उसके बारे में I would not like to say anything. Yes, please.
I wanted to know why you opened your speech by talking about the autonomy and the credibility of the RBI. Was there? Do you think that it's under threat? I mean, why did you make an opening?
You see, if I don't speak about it, then the interpretation would be that I have completely since I have a background in the government, so therefore I thought let me make the the ground rules very clear. So that's why I mentioned, and this is a question which I think in the, if you see over the past few, over the last 2-3 days and in the media, there's been a lot of talk. So I knew there will be questions about that. So I thought कि आपका जो question है, before the question comes, let me address it.
Sir,
what is your view on the farm debt waiver schemes? Earlier, RBI, your predecessors.
No, at this point, I would not like to give views on all aspects of this thing. I'll stop here. Thank you. No, later on. Thank you very much for all your patience. And we will be.
Deputy Governor still there?
And we will. Sorry.
Is Deputy Governor Acharya still there? Is he still as Deputy Governor?
I had tea with him some time ago. So as far as I know, he is very much there.
So
Thank you very much.
when was the news broken to you and by whom? So when was the news broken to you about coming to RBI and by whom? If you can answer that question, sir, it will be good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thumbs up.
Thank you.
Well, he's seasoned at dealing with the media. That is what the finance ministry does. It gives you training on how to deal with difficult questions. And there was plenty of that was sent Governor Das's way. Our guests are still standing by with us. Dr. Birmani, I interrupted you because the governor was speaking. But let me just highlight for the benefit of our viewers who may have joined us, let me recap what the new RBI governor has said. Categorically saying that while he intends to uphold the autonomy and the independence of the Reserve Bank of India, making no bones about the fact that it is the sovereign that is responsible for the economy, and it is the sovereign that also is responsible for accountability and runs the Reserve Bank of India in a sense as well, and hence consultations will be the order of the day. He's kicking off that process by consulting with public sector banks. That will happen tomorrow. Next meetings will be with public sector banks in the capital and then with private sector banks on the liquidity issue as well. He made it very clear that this was an issue that will need to be reviewed internally, and then he will take a call on whether any consultations were needed to address the issue of liquidity. The headline really, I'm open to looking at all issues. Obviously, it's too early for him to be able to make any categorical assertions one way or the other on any of those issues. But the other news point is that the 14th December board meeting of the Reserve Bank of India stands. He said that we will go ahead with the central board meeting on the 14th of December. So that board meeting stands. Dr. Virmani, your first takeaways there from what you heard from the new governor.
So when he came on, we were talking about stakeholder consultation, and that's kind of the first thing he repeated. Yeah. So that is what I expected. What he also made clear, which comes from him, is that the first part of that would be the banks, the public sector banks. Now clearly that is driven by 2-3 considerations. One is the whole issue of the PCA framework. The second is the capital adequacy of the banks, and what people have been saying, that they don't have enough capital and therefore they'll be constrained in their lending, etc., etc. So clearly that is the priority, to make sure that kind of external circumstances, or whatever you want to call it, are not gumming up the flow of credit to the economy. And then of course within that context, and maybe partly related to it, the whole liquidity issue. So that's kind of what one would have expected, and certainly one would support that. You know, whether you take his word about being independent or not at face value, clearly the way to go about it is to get all the views and then make a decision.
Absolutely. Let's also bring in the former RBI Deputy Governor, Mr. R. Gandhi, with us. Mr. Gandhi, the new governor just addressing the media there and saying very categorically that he intends to follow a consultative process. He will consult with all stakeholders, and that process will start tomorrow with a meeting with public sector banks. In your assessment, sir, do you believe that it would be the right thing to do for the Reserve Bank to provide any relaxation from the PCA framework for the 11 banks that find themselves under that? Because that has been the view publicly expressed so by the government, and the Reserve Bank has a different point of view. Given the state of the economy as well as the state of these 11 banks, what would you believe is the best way forward?
See, about the, of course, first of all, he has started off very well, saying that he will take all consultation he will hold with all stakeholders, and to begin with the PSB chiefs tomorrow. That is a good augury, and he is very comfortable in meeting with media also. That is also very clear from this meeting today. So, by congratulations to him and best wishes. That's right. And about your specific question about PCA framework. Yes, as of now, the PCA framework clearly indicates at what point in time a bank may be brought under the PCA framework. Certain clear, very transparent terms have been indicated. What is not as of now clear to all the people is that at what point in time a PCA bank may be coming out of the PCA framework. right now it is all under the full discretion of the Reserve Bank of India. That is where I would feel that if there is clarity is brought on at what particular benchmark the banks can be out of the PCA or a modified PCA. I think that should be the work in, I would suggest that's what they should be thinking about.
No, but that decision you believe is best left with the Reserve Bank of India?
Yeah, that's right. Because that will give a clarity to the PCA banks and the government and others that on what parameters the banks could be coming back to normalcy in terms of their credit growth and other conditions which have been put on. What kind of relaxation will be possible at what point in time?
Okay, all right. So a roadmap, a more clearer roadmap is what you're suggesting. Let me also bring in Jayesh Mehta to get a sense of what the bond market has made of the Reserve Bank Governor's first press conference. Jayesh, thanks very much for joining us. The RBI Governor starting off saying that he intends to follow a much more consultative approach when it comes to policy making. What's the first reaction on the back of what you've heard?
I think the overall bond market has reacted already. So I think, people not really waiting for the speech today. But you have seen the bonds have reacted almost by 10 basis points between yesterday and today. And I think this will enhance the bond market conviction. The yields going down. I think it's just a question of people may just wait for this 14th board meeting outcome. And it would consolidate. Of course, at every level, you will have profit booking coming in.
Yes, but what would the expectation be now from the board meeting on the 14th? Ahead of that, there is a meeting with public sector banks that he intends to have tomorrow. He said it's not on any specific agenda, but really to get a sense of what they make of things like capital adequacy in the economy, I would imagine. But what would the bond market's expectations be from the 14th when it comes to the contentious specific issues that we've discussed ad nauseum?
Yeah, so I think that's what people will be a little bit cautious that nothing dramatically changes on the 14th board meeting. Like as one of the reporters did ask, is there a plan to change the format of, the functioning of the board and stuff like that? If nothing dramatically changes, then I think the market would really look at, that we are looking at, unless the global things changes dramatically, but oil at 60, inflation at sub 4, market would really start looking for a rate cut.
We'll start looking for a rate cut. Okay, the governor was asked that question several times over, and of course, the response was that it is a decision that the MPC will take. But is that now being built in as a realistic expectation, Jayesh?
Yeah, so I think till now, people were actually looking at, maybe no rate cut or a rate hike. Yes, the market normally runs ahead, right? So the market's kind of pricing something, but it's still not fully priced yet.
Not fully priced yet. Jayesh, appreciate you joining us. Let me go back across to Lata now. She was there for that press conference with the RBI Governor. Lata, so, consultation, meetings with all stakeholders. The government is an important stakeholder. We intend to have free, fair and frank discussions. That was pretty much pitch perfect as far as Shaktikanta Das was concerned on day one.
Yes, I think it was a very positive statement coming from Mr. Shaktikanta. He started by trying to address all concerns, started by saying that he would uphold the independence, the autonomy and credibility of the Reserve Bank, gave it generous praise, and also said that he would work for growth. So when questioned, he said, the Act also requires me to look at growth. Actually, very careful answers. I don't think you can find any fault with the way in which he couched every one of his answers. Due respect to RBI, to autonomy, independence, its knowledge, as well as to the demands of growth. He's going to meet public sector banks first. That is a bit of a giveaway, but, perhaps as the biggest sector in the banking space, it is not wrong of him to meet the public sector banks first. He is going to meet private sector banks later. The most direct question, of course, that he was faced with is, what about board governance? That's going to come up on Friday. So the first thing he confirmed is there is a board meeting. And the second thing he said is that, yes, every institution deserves its autonomy. but it should also be accountable. Now, you could say that that is a big giveaway, in that he didn't seem vehemently opposed to the fact that there would be board supervision of the RBI's decisions. I don't know how RBI DGs and inmates and the world outside will take to that. He said that RBI has to be accountable. So, that is something that he will be held to account in future press meetings and in decisions. Otherwise, it was all on expected lines. The committee itself on capital is going to be appointed, so he did not give us any further details on whether capital will be taken away from the RBI, how much and by when. So basically, other than that point where he said that RBI also has to be accountable, I didn't really see anything new coming out of this press conference. Everything was on expected lines, and he kept repeating that he would work and uphold the autonomy of the Reserve Bank.
Well, I mean, to be fair, what more can you expect from him on day one? He's barely spent the last few hours in office. But let me just take that point across to both our guests, Dr. Virmani and Mr. R. Gandhi, are with us. Lata, and I'll keep coming back to you as well. Dr. Virmani, this point about accountability, and this has been the view within government as well, that while we respect the independence and the autonomy of the Reserve Bank of India, at the end, the sovereign is held accountable, and hence, the sovereign must have a stake and a say in policy making, even when it comes to the Reserve Bank of India.
So let me start with the board question, which is kind of linked to it. I don't think there will be any big issues discussed of that grand scale of accountability and autonomy. I think there are two things. One, I am not sure whether he will announce that committee which has already been agreed before he meets the board, or may wait. But the real purpose of the interaction with the board will be to get a sense of what the various members have already been saying to the earlier governor. That would be really his priority, is to, it's easy to make a list of items they may have discussed, but I think what he will try to do is just to get a sense of what are the issues on the minds of these board members and how they have kind of responded to the various issues raised. So I think that, from his perspective, is the purpose of that meeting.
You're right, and this is what we are picking up from our sources as well, that perhaps what seemed like the need to press ahead on governance-related issues on the 14th of December in the RBI board meeting, this is no longer going to be such a priority because there has been a leadership change, and perhaps this is not going to be a priority item, at least as far as the 14th December board meeting is concerned. Lakshmi Iyer of Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company also with us. Lakshmi, many thanks for joining us. What do you make of the comments, the first comments that have come in from the Reserve Bank governor, and what is it that you will be watching out for from here on?
Yeah, I think the bond markets were not really expecting any explosive, revelations, etc. in the first public appearance. So I think it seems to be broadly, reiterating some sort of a confidence in the market. I think the cue which markets do and already gave the incoming governor sort of a muh dikhai was a 10 basis rally which happened over yesterday's close, and I think that momentum is likely to sustain. The subtle message which also seems to be coming around is that the governor and the government are not parallel lines, but they could be perpendicular lines, and therefore the consultative process needs to be on.
Not parallel lines, but perpendicular lines. I would imagine that, as you pointed out, the muh dikhai has happened, but now we will await the decisions, and perhaps the first set of decisions, or maybe some decisions, could be expected on the 14th of December. What's the best bet at this point in time, Lakshmi, when it comes to the contentious issues? What's the market factoring in, if anything at all, from the 14th of December?
I don't think markets are factoring, again, any miracles to happen by magician Shaktikanta Das to, announce. But more, as I said, specifically that the markets were pretty happy with the fact that the RBI's outlook on inflation continues to be benign. And yes, the RBI also, in a way, is concerned with respect to growth. So I think these are positive cues for market to take forward to ensure that yields remain at the current levels with a marginally appreciating bias.
Okay, Mr. Gandhi, the question that was asked to Mr. Das was whether the RBI would be inclined to any growth stimulating measures at this point in time. And, we were discussing the possibility of a rate cut. One of the guests suggested that perhaps that could be on the anvil, at least some quarters of the market seem to suggest so. But given the fact that we're at a three-quarter low when it comes to growth, do you believe that growth stimulating measures at all are required at this point in time?
Say, growth stimulation will not be the primary objective of the Reserve Bank of India because statutorily its primary duty is towards inflation targeting. So once the inflation is well under its target...
But sir, the reason I ask you that is because the governor himself pointed it out that under the RBI Act, growth is also some responsibility as far as the Reserve Bank is concerned. His words were, I'm not bringing in anything extraneous. So what do you take away from that?
Yeah, I'm coming to that only. That's primarily the Reserve Bank has to be fully convinced about the inflation as per its own target. And once it is within its targeted 4 percentage point, then any measure that it will take will be towards supporting the growth. So that is a sequence of the objective or the priority that the bank will have. So once it has a complete comfort, that MPC has a comfort that inflation is now fully tamed, then the attention will be on growth supporting measures.
Okay. Janmejay Sinha, Chairman of the Boston Consulting Group, also with us. Mr. Sinha, thanks very much. The new governor taking office, addressing the media for the very first time, saying that he intends to follow a much more consultative approach, also making it clear that there has to be accountability for the Reserve Bank of India. Your first comments on what you heard?
A former governor had been a former finance secretary. When he took over, he said that, my view is influenced by the chair I sit on, because I see different vistas from different chairs. And I find that every governor, when they come to the RBI, they sit in an RBI chair and they see the vista from RBI. When they sit in Delhi, they sit in a Delhi chair and they see the vista from Delhi. So I would not be surprised that we should not be in a hurry to prejudge anyone. When they sit into these institutions which are long, they tend to actually take on a lot of the institutions' narrative. So
you're saying that he's going to be converted into an RBI man and not necessarily continue from where he left off at North Block?
So I don't know what an RBI man is, but I certainly know that he will have the views of the governor. He'll have the views of a governor rather than of a finance secretary.
No, fair point, sir. But just on those contentious issues which have been publicly discussed, so there's no secret there, what would your expectation be on how he treads these troubled waters and addresses some of those contentious issues? Because the government has made its point of view very, very clear when it comes to liquidity, when it comes to bringing some of these banks out of the PCA mechanism, when it comes to capital reserves, for instance. And the Reserve Bank under Urjit Patel had a certain point of view. Given the fact that his entry into the Reserve Bank happens in a fairly unprecedented situation, what would your expectation be on how he treads these vexed issues?
So, actually, to be honest, despite what has been reported a lot in the media, the issues are not quite as contentious as they are made out to be. And sometimes the rules and the interpretation of the rules provides a lot of latitude and discretion. So the PCA framework, how Mr. Gandhi was talking before, that, there is discretion and that discretion can be used. Looking at the quality of the different banks and where they are in their recovery. Issues around the interpretation of the PCA rules, there is open. Liquidity actually is an RBI issue, and RBI will not allow liquidity to dry up. So there may be a little bit of a worry about, NBFCs, and whenever there are market hiccups like ILFS, etc., the market tends to tighten. And when the market tends to tighten, spread, for NBFCs, the ALM becomes tighter and they make less money. But before, if they started to become seriously affected and, for example, if the real estate market tanks or something, I'm sure RBI will be quick off the block because then it causes a systemic, problem. And actually, that's an RBI problem more than a government problem. The government would not like to see that. I mean, the RBI would not like to see that.
Yeah. Would not like to see that happen. So let me address both those issues separately. And let me start by asking you about the PCA framework, because as you pointed out, Mr. Gandhi also believes that a clearer roadmap should perhaps be articulated by the Reserve Bank. And you also believe that there should be discretion exercised there, given the performance of these 11 banks, and many of them may differ in the degrees of their performance. So do you believe that at this point in time, there could be the possibility of relaxation for some of these banks who may have shown some degree of a turnaround?
Yeah, Shireen,
is
the way I look at it is what has happened currently is that banks were finding it easier to go into the market, to go into CPs, because it was easier. It was not going through the entire loan process. And then the NBFCs were intermediating for the banks. And the banks were happy with that because they were not getting under the scrutiny of any bad loans. But because the NBFCs have tightened up, because the CP market tightened up, there is this general sense around what is going to happen with the CPs. Even if the PCA framework was relaxed, I am not sure that these banks would be suddenly lending that much. We have to be able to go to the real. What will actually happen? Do you think if we took out all these 11 banks from the PCA framework, suddenly lending would increase? I didn't see lending increase before they were in the PCA framework, because when they are carrying the bad loans that they are and the kind of capitalization that they need, this has actually, in some ways the NBFCs took up the slack and they did it more efficiently. So we need to just recognize that some of these things, become a bigger issue and then people take positions, and that's always a problem. So I think consultations would be a good thing, but I don't know that any of these are magic wands which will make for a rapid change. The big issue that we have got is a large stack of bad loans, and those bad loans have been there for a long time, and those projects are in deep trouble. So, I mean, till some of those start getting resolved, the economy doesn't flow that well. The velocity of credit is low.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right that just because some of these banks may no longer find themselves under the PCA framework doesn't mean that they will automatically start to lend. But that's been the argument that has been made in some quarters in Delhi, sir. But, on the second point of liquidity, and you said that this is more of an RBI problem and that the RBI would not like to see this develop into a systemic problem or a systemic risk. Now, if I go back to what we've heard from the RBI so far, and to address the liquidity issue, they've been doing the OMOs, etc. And the comment that came in from the RBI that we are the lender of the last resort, but we don't believe that it has come to that pass just yet. So do you believe then that this clamor for more liquidity, for more access to credit as far as NBFCs is concerned, is perhaps a tad exaggerated?
So I feel that the NBFCs, the people are making a bit less money because the markets have tightened, and so they are not having the same benefits on the ALM side. And so they, of course, would like more liquidity because then they would borrow cheaper, and so they would make a bigger spread. If they were actually being shut out, that would be a serious issue, and I would not want anyone in India to wish for that to happen. All NBFCs have to deal with the...
But you don't believe that... So you don't agree with the scare that's being created. That's my point. Do you agree with the scare and the scenario that's being built around this liquidity issue, especially when we talk about NBFCs, HFCs, real estate, and so on and so forth? Because the RBI certainly doesn't seem to have that view.
No. My big fear is I think RBI is quite aware of the fact that if the real sector tips, we have got a real problem. And let's not underestimate that. Because right now, with the problems with ILFS, and some other places where, you had a lot of SPVs which had converted debt into equity, and so we had a situation which was unfortunate. But if, that there is a situation which comes in, which starts to see real estate companies start to go into trouble, then we have a real problem. RBI and government, everyone should be, really watching that very closely. And if they are not, it's really unfortunate. They should be watching that very closely. And if that happens, do everything in their power to deal with it. Right now, is that the situation? I'm not so sure. But, market participants are on the phone. They would have a better sense.
Okay. Let me bring in a former market participant, well, a banking participant for certain, and I'll come back to you, Mr. Sinha. I'd appreciate if you can hold on. Pradeep Chaudhary also with us. Mr. Chaudhary, thanks very much for joining us, sir. Shaktikanta Das taking over at the Reserve Bank of India. His first round of consultations will be with public sector banks in Mumbai tomorrow. What's your expectations, sir, from things from here on as far as the new governor is concerned?
No, I think he has to give some signals, and most importantly, he has to convey a message that he is, open to listening. He is at least sensitive to the feelings and sensitive to the situation in the market. Right now, the difficulty is that IBI is perceived as absolutely, like Sphinx-like Buddha, so they would not communicate. So what is more important is he gives out a desire that yes, we are here to listen, and which is not such a bad thing.
Huh. No, more communication is certainly never certainly required. So you're saying that the RBI needs to be less Sphinx-like.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I want to pick up on the point that Janmejai Sinha was making, and I want to get your perspective as well, and Dr. Virmani was pointing to that as well. Do you believe that, like your colleague Mr. Gandhi or Mr. Sinha or Mr. Virmani are pointing out, that there needs to be some discretion as far as the PCA framework is concerned, and while that may not necessarily mean that lending by these banks will start from tomorrow, but do you believe that this is a point that requires some redressal by the Reserve Bank of India?
Yes, I think Reserve Bank of India has to be less dogmatic and
yes, sir, go ahead.
And why must they keep the benchmark so high? They can keep the benchmark at a level equivalent to Basel. So, and they have kept an additional 1% capital requirement, which of course at this time is not very useful. And of course, Reserve Bank is right in pursuing and pressurizing the government to release the capital, because government also is committed to releasing the capital. Now, if you have to release it in December, why do it on 31st? Why don't you do it on 15th itself? So, capital release should also be accelerated. But sure, if more banks come out of PCA, by whatever way, by additional capital or by relaxing the norms, then it will lead to greater supply in the market. And I was just in a meeting with one of the NBFCs, and they were saying that we don't have difficulty, but the banks are charging 3% more, and the banks are not releasing even the sanctioned limits, because limit is something, and it is always said that it goes with the market conditions. So if the banks think that the market conditions there are not enough liquidity, they can always find a reason not to release the money. So it is more of psychological, and that has to be alleviated by RBI itself. But to my mind, I might hold my original argument that
okay, you're saying two things. So you're saying that the government has to accelerate the process of capitalizing banks, and the Reserve Bank must look at the Basel requirements and whether or not that additional 1% is needed at this point in time. But on the liquidity issue, sir, I mean, what is it that you would like the Reserve Bank to do? Because as you said, that this is perhaps much more of a psychological problem that is causing this kind of a liquidity constraint in the market than perhaps a real problem. So how would you like the Reserve Bank to address it?
It's very simple. Very simple. Cut the CRR by 2%. That releases about 2 lakh crores into the economy. And CRR in terms of economic value is zero. How does it help the GDP? It is just, blocking, and today with oil prices being so benign and inflation, I don't think is a problem, because 2.5% or 3% is the retail inflation, and it is much below even that 4.5% RBI has kept a mark. So you won't, release the CRR, of course, when the inflation is high, and when the inflation is low, then also you will not release. Then how is the CRR a flexible instrument? And secondly, you have seen enough. We have had 12% CRR and 37% SLR. So where did it lead the country to? It led the country to Hindu rate of growth. So in 92, when the rate were relaxed, the country has taken off. So accelerate the process.
Okay. Accelerate the process of cutting the CRR by 2%. Dr. Virmani, let me come to you. And this was a suggestion that was being spoken of ahead of the Monetary Policy Committee meeting. And when this question was asked of the former Governor Urjit Patel, he said that there is no need to use the CRR as an instrument at this point in time. Pradeep Chaudhary, they're making it clear that it should be cut by at least 2%. I know you're probably on his side.
My understanding is that the CRR is now included in the law. So going below 3% requires changing the law. From 4 to 3%, there's a 1% margin. But you know, I want to actually come back to an issue which Mr. Sinha mentioned. You see, the point I've been making since the start of this discussion between former governor and not discussion, the fight, if you want to call it, is that there is a difference between ideology and principles. You know, ideology is arbitrary. It is something I have in mind, I will do it no matter what happens. What Mr. Sinha has very correctly pointed out, you have to look at what is the effect of specific things, specific actions, specific non-actions on what will happen in wherever you are. Whether you are concerned about inflation, you are concerned about economy, or you are concerned about the motives of the lenders, etc. You have to look at what will actually happen rather than have some construct ideological which determines everything. So that is one point. The second point is principles can be applied flexibly. I have never said that don't go by principle. Let me tell you one principle of a central bank intervention. It is that you never focus on or support or oppose individual banks or individual players in the market. You look at the principle you do overall in the market. Now that's second. And the third one is there's always an issue of phasing. You know, I've been in policy advice and policy making for quarter century. And the basic principle one learnt was that you must have your objectives clear, but always be flexible in the timing and phasing. That depends on the real world, what is happening. Things change. If there is a sudden crisis somewhere, you don't keep insisting that I must do it today. So from this perspective, I'll just conclude because I have to go. From this perspective, I am sure that Shaktikant, who has dealt with many different issues, you know, not necessarily that he's an initiator or he's a big policy reformer, but I think this basic principle he understands. And I think will do well on this aspect.
Okay, so Dr. Virmani says flexibility when it comes to decision making and less sphinx-like is the recommendation coming in from Pradeep Chaudhary. Janmejay Sinha, let me come back to you now on what you would like the Reserve Bank to do more, be more flexible, be less sphinx-like. Those are the two recommendations. Well, how would you add to that list? And specifically on the CRR pitch that's been made there by Pradeep Chaudhary. And again, this is something that we've been debating for a while here on CNBC TV 18. Your take?
Look, you know, to me, the biggest issue that currently exists is still cleaning up the bad loans that exist in the public sector banks and in the overall economy. And, you know, we can keep talking about a little bit of capital being moved from here to there and this, that, the other. Those are, you know, to my mind, we are getting distracted. You know, what is it? Even if we were to look at RBI's capital reserve, if you actually take the active capital reserve, you're talking about 20,000 crores one way or the other. You know, I mean, those things don't make that much of a difference. Right now, we have one big issue. The one big issue that we have is the bad loans in the banking system. And we have to think of ways to actually affect it and address it. And we, you know, just the same way that we have to look at it, we have to consider whether we need to have 51% ownership by the government of public sector banks. You know, if they were to be brought down to 26%, you know, actually... So
that was the expectation. That was the expectation that this government would go through with that big reform, which it never did.
Yeah, so I'm just saying at some point, you know, that this issue, that the same guidelines that RBI applies for private sector banks and promoters there, if it could be brought into public sector banks and the government be the single largest owner, but not a 51% owner, the price to books of these banks will increase, capitalization will happen automatically, the sector will become more vibrant, their salaries will get adjusted. So I'm saying, we are just getting distracted with some sub-level issues which are attracting a lot of media attention. There is a big problem. The big problem is bad loans. Those bad loans have to be adjusted. We need to figure out how we want to do it. How does the government have enough capital? And then if we carry on in the same way, why will this not recur again? So I think, let's not get distracted. I really would like that issue to get resolved.
Yeah. We're running out of time. We're running out of time, sir. So very quickly, let me ask you, because there has also been a feeling in some quarters in Delhi that, while we want things to clean up, but perhaps what the Reserve Bank embarked on was an irrational cleanup. Would you concur with that view, Mr. Sinha? And do you believe that this is going to be an area that the new governor will have to look at?
But, let's be fair. That started in 2014. And the AQRs and all started in 2014 and 2015. And once you go down a path, institutions like RBI find it difficult to turn on and turn off. So, there is a lot of path dependency that creeps in. Because otherwise, I feel the IBC, the NCLT and all are great things, but the legacy issues needed to have been dealt with, with more creativity.
Okay, Mr. Chaudhary, I'll give you the final say, sir. 30 seconds. We're completely out of time. What would your expectation be in this first meeting with public sector banks? What should be high on the priority list?
Oh, I think we are making this distinction which is not necessary. Why do you meet public sector separately and private sector separately? The role for a bank or the expectation for a bank is the same. So why do you make a distinction like this? And secondly, if you lower the threshold or if you lower the shareholding from 51 to 26 or wherever, I think there would be a flight of deposits. In fact, today public sector banks, one problem they don't have is the deposits. And even you see Kotak Bank and Yes Bank are paying 6% on savings bank deposit, whereas no public sector banks pays more than 3.5 or 4. So that advantage will go, and not only capital, they would also be constrained of these deposits, resources.
All right, gentlemen, we are completely out of time. We'll have to leave it there. Pradeep Chaudhary, Janmejay Sinha, Arvind Virmani, R. Gandhi, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18 to take stock of the first press conference that's been addressed by the new governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Shaktikanta Das. We're not done just yet. We're coming back with a lot more. Stay on with us.